It started on a rainy Wednesday, a day as forgettable as any other. I was doing something so mundane, it still stings to think about it. I was supposed to meet Melissa, my wife of 7 years, at her office for lunch. She had texted earlier that morning, asking if we could meet later instead because she had a long meeting. I shrugged it off, thinking nothing of it. Her job in marketing could be unpredictable, and she was always swamped with deadlines. But as I was out running errands, I realized I left my wallet at home. I knew Melissa had a spare key to the house in her car, so I swung by her office to grab it. She had recently gotten a new car, a sleek SUV she loved flaunting, but was constantly leaving it unlocked. I approached it, rain pelting my jacket, and pulled the door handle. It popped open, no surprise. I leaned in to grab the key from the center console, and that's when I saw it. A small, leather-bound notebook sat on the passenger seat. It was a strange sight. Melissa was the digital type, always on her phone. Curious, I flipped it open, and that's when my world tilted. The first page was innocent enough, a list of things she needed to buy for the house. But as I turned the pages, my heart began to race. There were dates and names, places I didn't recognize, bars, hotels, even a few late-night rendezvous at friends' houses. Scribbled notes in her unmistakable handwriting, recounting how she had cheated on me with someone named Chris. And not just once, multiple times. The last entry was from the previous week. I felt my hands go numb. My eyes couldn't tear away from the words. I met Chris again last night. We went to that bar downtown. He couldn't keep his hands off me. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Every detail, every betrayal, was laid out in front of me in her own words. Dates aligned with nights she had told me she was working late. Places we had driven past together, completely oblivious to the fact she had been with someone else there. In the moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like someone had taken my life and shredded it in front of me. I sat there, in the driver's seat of her car, trying to process what I had just read. The rain pounded harder on the roof, but the storm inside me was worse. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my head. Did I confront her? Did I pack my bags? Call a lawyer? Or just drive far away and never look back? But first, I needed to know the truth. Every last bit of it. The notebook felt like a burning weight in my hands, as if holding it was confirmation that everything in my life up to this point had been a lie. My mind raced. How long had this been going on? Was Chris the only one? There had to be some mistake, some rational explanation. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. The details were too explicit, too personal. I slammed the notebook shut and tossed it onto the passenger seat, my hands shaking as if I had just committed a crime. I looked around, half expecting someone to pop out of nowhere and accuse me of snooping, but I was alone. Alone with the truth. Melissa had been cheating on me. I sat back in the seat, the rain still hammering down outside. My heart was racing, my chest tight. I wanted to scream, to punch something, but all I could do was sit there, staring out the windshield, lost in my own spiraling thoughts. Memories started flooding back. Little things that never made sense suddenly clicked into place. The business trips that seemed to come up more frequently. The late-night texts she'd brush off as work. Her sudden obsession with her appearance, buying new clothes, wearing perfume to meetings. I had noticed it all, but I never questioned her. I trusted her. The feeling of betrayal was like a knife twisting in my gut. It wasn't just that she had cheated. It was the fact that she had done it so effortlessly, weaving lies into the fabric of our daily life without a hint of guilt. How long had I been the fool, blind to her deceit? I needed answers. I grabbed the notebook again, flipping through the pages more furiously this time. The details were excruciating. She had written down times, locations, and even comments on the sex, as if it were all just a casual affair she needed to record for later. And then I saw it. Another name. Mark. It wasn't just Chris. There was someone else. Mark. The guy from her office. The one she mentioned in passing, always with a casual laugh, as if he were nothing more than a colleague. He had even come to a few work dinners we'd hosted. I had shaken his hand. For God's sake. I felt sick. 2 men, 2 separate lives she had been living, all while playing the role of devoted wife to me. It wasn't an affair. It was an entire lifestyle of betrayal. How many others were there? Could I even bear to know? My hands were trembling now, my vision blurring with rage. I couldn't sit there any longer. I had to get out, to breathe. I left the notebook where it was and slammed the door shut behind me. The rain soaked through my clothes instantly, but I didn't care. I needed space, distance from the evidence of my wife's infidelity, from the life I thought we had built together. I stumbled back to my car, my mind a whirlpool of anger, confusion, and hurt. How had I missed this? How had I not seen the signs? I had always prided myself on being a good husband, on being present. But none of that had mattered. She had lied to my face, again and again. I started the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I needed to calm down, to think. But all I could see was her face, smiling, lying, betraying me. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying every moment from the past few months. The arguments, the distance that had crept into our marriage, the way she had started brushing off my attempts to get close to her. All the pieces were there, scattered like breadcrumbs, and I had ignored them. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw her car already parked in the garage. She must have come home early. Perfect. The confrontation was inevitable now. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at her car. The rain had let up, but the storm inside me was still raging. I knew what had to happen next, but the thought of facing her, of hearing whatever lies or excuses she would spew, made my stomach churn. I got out of the car, walking mechanically toward the front door. My mind was blank, wiped clean by the pure adrenaline coursing through me. Every step felt heavy, as though the truth I now carried weighed down my entire body. When I reached the front door, I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Could I really do this? Could I confront her head-on without losing it completely? I opened the door and stepped inside. The house felt colder than usual. The air was thick with an unsettling quiet, the kind of silence that only builds before something catastrophic happens. I heard movement from the kitchen, Melissa, humming to herself as she prepared something. The normalcy of it all made me sick. I walked in, my eyes scanning the room, half expecting to see some clue of her double life strewn across the kitchen counter. But everything was neat, spotless. The same perfect image she had always projected. When she turned around, her face lit up in a smile. "Hey, I thought you were staying out longer," she said, her voice casual. "I was just making dinner. I can set the table if you're hungry." "I found your diary." The words came out cold, flat. I wasn't even sure I had said them at first, but the look on her face told me I had. Her smile faltered, eyes widening for just a fraction of a second before she regained composure. It was like watching someone quickly reshuffle a deck of cards, trying to pull the right one. "What?" She laughed, but it was strained, nervous. "What are you talking about?" "The notebook in your car, Melissa. The one where you wrote about Chris and Mark." I spat the names like poison. Her face drained of color, the blood rushing from her cheeks. For a moment, she just stood there, the spatula in her hand frozen midair. I watched her carefully, waiting for the moment she would try to talk her way out of this, to spin some convoluted story. But she didn't. Not right away. She just stared at me, like a deer caught in headlights. "You've got nothing to say?" I pressed, my voice rising. "No excuses? No lies you've prepared for this moment?" Finally, she moved, setting the spatula down on the counter. I don't know what you think you saw, but it's not what it looks like." Her voice wavered, but there was a sharpness beneath it, like she was already calculating her next move. "Not what it looks like?" I laughed bitterly. "Melissa, I read it. I read everything. You're having an affair, or affairs, should I say." I could feel my control slipping. "You wrote down every sick detail, like it was some kind of trophy for you." Her eyes flickered, a brief moment of something. Panic, guilt, maybe even regret. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She crossed her arms defensively, and I could see her building up her walls. "It's not what you think," she said again, her voice more steady now. I was going through something. I never meant for it to happen. It didn't mean anything. Chris, Mark, they didn't mean anything to me. I could feel my blood boiling. Didn't mean anything? You wrote about it in detail. You made it mean something every time you snuck off to meet them. You've been living two lives, Melissa, and now you're standing here telling me it's nothing? She sighed, rubbing her temples, as if I were just another problem she had to solve. Look, I don't know what you want me to say. It's complicated. I made mistakes. I shouldn't have written those things down, but it's not like I don't care about you. I do. This doesn't change that. Doesn't change that? I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. You betrayed me. You lied to me every single day while you were screwing other men. This changes everything, Melissa. Her calm demeanor cracked slightly, a hint of anger creeping into her voice. I'm not the only one at fault here, you know? You were never around. You were always so wrapped up in your own world, in your job. I needed someone who was there for me. I stared at her, incredulous. So it's my fault now? Because I worked to provide for us, to keep this life we built? That's your excuse for cheating? She looked away, her arms tightening around herself, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the gears turning in her head, but I wasn't about to let her shift the blame onto me. No, I said, my voice low but firm. You don't get to do that. You don't get to rewrite the story just because you got caught. The silence that followed was suffocating. Melissa didn't meet my eyes, her body still tense as if she was bracing for something worse. I could see the mask she'd been wearing for years finally slipping, revealing the raw truth beneath. But the worst part was how calm she seemed, as if this was just another inconvenience, another hurdle she'd spin her way out of. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said, her voice quieter now, almost rehearsed. I was lonely. You were always so busy with work, and I needed something to feel alive again. Alive? I shot back, disbelief heavy in my voice. You think this is about you feeling alive? What about me? Our marriage? You've been pretending everything's fine while sneaking around behind my back for God knows how long. You don't get to use loneliness as a justification for destroying everything we built. My anger was rising, and I had to fight to keep control. She had the audacity to stand there, to make excuses. Excuses for the fact that she had gone behind my back, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip-up. It was a calculated betrayal. I was done listening to her explanations. I'm filing for divorce, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. The moment they left my mouth, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. It wasn't the life I had imagined for us, but it was the only way out of this mess. Her eyes snapped back to mine, wide and startled, like she hadn't expected me to go that far so quickly. What? No, wait. We can work through this. Her voice rose with panic, the facade of calm crumbling. People make mistakes, and they fix them. We can fix this. Fix this? There was no fixing this. She had lied, cheated, and now she wanted to sweep it all under the rug and act like we could go back to normal. But there was no normal anymore. Whatever we had was shattered beyond repair. You're delusional if you think I'm going to stay with you after this, I said, my voice cold and steady. I trusted you, Melissa. I believed in us, in what we had, and you threw it all away. She took a step toward me, her hands reaching out as if she could somehow undo what she had done. Please, we can go to therapy. I'll stop seeing them, Chris, Mark, whoever. I'll cut them out of my life. Just don't leave me. I don't want to lose you. It was almost laughable, the way she tried to bargain her way out of this, like a kid caught with their hand in the cookie jar. But this wasn't some childish mistake. This was years of deception, years of her living a life that I didn't even know existed. You already lost me, I said, stepping back, away from her outstretched hands. You lost me the moment you decided that being with other men was more important than being honest with me. I don't care what you do with them now. I'm done. Her face twisted in desperation. You can't just walk away. We've been together for 7 years. You're going to throw that all away because of a few mistakes? Mistakes. That word again. As if this was something small, something fixable. My jaw clenched as I stared at her. You don't get to minimize this. You betrayed me, repeatedly. There's no coming back from that. Her desperation quickly morphed into anger. So that's it? You're just going to leave me? Like I meant nothing to you? I could feel the rage bubbling up inside me again, but I forced it down. She was trying to turn this on me, trying to make me feel guilty for her choices. But I wasn't the one who had destroyed our marriage. You meant everything to me, I said, my voice quiet but firm. But clearly, I didn't mean the same to you. The weight of those words hung in the air between us, and I could see the truth of them sinking into her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty hall as I headed for the door. I could hear her behind me, calling my name, pleading, but I didn't stop. As I reached for the doorknob, I hesitated for just a moment. There was a part of me that still wanted to believe this wasn't real, that maybe we could find some way to piece our lives back together. But then I remembered the notebook, the names, the places, and I knew there was no going back. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the life I had known for the past 7 years. The night was quiet, almost eerie in its stillness. I stood on the front porch for a moment, my breath visible in the cool air, trying to process everything that had just happened. My entire world had crumbled in the span of a few hours, and I felt hollow, like something had been ripped from me. I stared at the sky, feeling the weight of what I had just done sink in. Divorce. I had said it out loud. There was no turning back now. My marriage was over. The thought of it sent a strange chill down my spine. 7 years. 7 years of shared memories, laughter, struggles, and plans for a future that now seemed laughably naive. It all felt like some kind of twisted joke. How could someone who had been my partner for so long, someone I had built a life with, be the same person who had deceived me so thoroughly? I walked to my car, the reality of what came next sinking in. What was I supposed to do? Where was I supposed to go? I didn't have a plan for this. It wasn't like I could just drive off and leave everything behind. My life was still entangled with hers. Our house, our finances, our entire world was intertwined in ways I hadn't even begun to unravel. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel as the gravity of the situation hit me. This wasn't going to be simple. Divorce never was. It was messy, painful, and drawn out. I wasn't just walking away from Melissa. I was walking away from the life we had built together. And as much as I hated her for what she had done, I couldn't shake the pain of losing everything else that came with it. I leaned back in the seat, the rain having slowed to a drizzle now, pattering softly against the windshield. My mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. Lawyers, paperwork, splitting assets, things I had never thought I'd have to deal with. I had always believed we would grow old together, that we would make it through the hard times like any other couple. But that future had been snatched away in the cruelest way possible. A part of me felt numb, like I was watching all of this unfold from a distance. Was this really my life now? A husband scorned, blindsided by betrayal? It seemed unreal. I had always seen myself as the kind of person who had it all together. I had a good job, a stable home, and a loving wife. Except, now I realized that last part was a lie. The betrayal was what hurt the most. The fact that she had lived this double life, sneaking off to meet other men while I was at work, blissfully unaware. I thought back to the times I had asked her how her day went, how she'd smile and tell me about a busy day at the office, while she was probably thinking about Chris, or Mark, or God knows who else. The anger returned, burning hotter than before. I had been a fool, blinded by trust, by love. And now, I was the one left picking up the pieces while she stood inside our house, probably already calculating how to salvage her own life. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't sit in this driveway, looking at the house we had made a home, knowing it was now tainted with her lies. I started the engine and drove off, not even knowing where I was going. I just needed to move, to escape. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the city lights blurring as I sped down empty streets. My mind was racing, unable to settle on any single thought for more than a few seconds before jumping to another. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't just go home. Not yet. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, pulling me out of my daze. I glanced down at the screen, Melissa. Of course. I ignored it, but it buzzed again almost immediately. And again. She wasn't going to let this go easily. After the fifth call, I finally picked up, my hand trembling with a mix of fury and exhaustion. "What?" I spat into the phone, not even bothering to hide my anger. Her voice was frantic, panicked. "Where are you? We need to talk about this. Please don't just walk away like this. I didn't mean for it to get this far." I laughed bitterly. "You didn't mean for it to get this far? Melissa, you've been cheating on me for who knows how long. You knew exactly what you were doing." She hesitated on the other end, her voice softening, almost pleading. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But we can work through this. We can fix it, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes." I clenched my teeth, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. "No, you don't get to fix this. You had your chance. I'm done, Melissa." There was silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, but she didn't say anything for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, don't leave me." Something inside me twisted. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but it was fleeting, drowned out by the overwhelming sense of betrayal that had taken root in me. I couldn't let her manipulate me with her desperation. "I already have," I said quietly, and hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. I pulled over to the side of the road, staring out at the city lights in the distance, trying to piece together what my life looked like now. Everything felt surreal, like I was in someone else's nightmare. But this was my reality, and I had to face it. Hanging up on her felt like severing the last thread that connected me to the life I once knew. As the silence filled the car, it hit me. There was no going back. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was gone. Maybe she had been gone long before this, and I was just now waking up to the truth. I sat there on the side of the road, my head resting against the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. But the weight in my chest wouldn't ease. The anger, the hurt, the sense of betrayal. It all churned inside me, making me feel sick. The city lights blurred into the distance as I tried to steady myself. This was supposed to be the part where I felt relief, right? I had made the decision. I was done. I had walked away from her lies, from the web of deceit she had built around me. But instead of relief, all I felt was emptiness. Like someone had carved out a part of me and left nothing behind. How do you go from building a life with someone to being strangers in a single night? 1,000 questions kept swirling through my mind. What had I missed? How long had she been doing this? Were there others beyond Chris and Mark? And the worst part, did she ever love me at all? Or was it all just some elaborate lie? The thought of her laughing, smiling with me while leading this double life made my skin crawl. My phone buzzed again, but this time I didn't bother to look at it. I knew it was her. I could almost picture her pacing in the kitchen, rehearsing her next plea, crafting another apology, another desperate attempt to salvage her image. But there was nothing left for her to salvage. I needed to get my head straight, to figure out what came next. The anger was still simmering under the surface, but now it was competing with exhaustion. My entire body felt heavy, like I'd been running a marathon that had no finish line. I couldn't keep driving aimlessly through the city, avoiding the inevitable. I made a decision. I needed space. Space to breathe, space to think. The house, our house, was out of the question. There was no way I could step foot back in that place, not with the memories and the lies so fresh. Instead, I drove to the one place that had always been mine, an old family cabin out by the lake, about an hour outside the city. As I drove, the roads gradually emptied, the bright lights of the city fading into darkness. The silence was almost suffocating, but at least it gave me time to think. The cabin was isolated, remote, the perfect place to clear my head. I hadn't been there in years, but it was the only place that felt like an escape now. The cabin looked almost the same as it had the last time I visited. A bit more worn, the paint peeling in some places, but it still held the same sense of quiet solitude that I craved right now. I parked the car and stepped out, the cool air biting at my skin. The only sound was the rustling of trees and the faint lapping of water against the shore. As I stepped inside, memories from my childhood flooded back. Summers spent here with my parents, nights by the fire, the simple peace of it all. It was strange how comforting the place felt, even after everything. It was like the world outside didn't exist here. No betrayal, no lies, no Melissa. I dropped my keys on the counter and stood in the doorway, staring at the empty room. There was a bed in the corner, a small kitchenette, and a worn leather chair by the fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to get away from everything. The cabin was the kind of place where you could hear yourself think, where the weight of the world didn't feel so crushing. But tonight, the silence felt heavy, almost oppressive. I sank into the leather chair, staring at the empty fireplace, feeling the weight of everything pressed down on me. Melissa's words echoed in my head. Her pleas, her desperation, but they felt hollow now. I couldn't believe anything she said anymore. She had twisted the truth for so long that I didn't even know what was real and what was fake. How could I trust anything that came out of her mouth now? I thought about the notebook again. The words I had read, the names, the dates. They haunted me, playing on a loop in my mind. I had read the pages, but somehow the betrayal felt worse the more I thought about it. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the way she had kept it hidden so easily, like she was playing a game I didn't even know I was a part of. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to despise everything about her. But there was still a part of me that was clinging to the past, to the woman I had fallen in love with, the life we had shared. How could I let that go so easily? But I had to. There was no other choice. She had made that decision for me the moment she started seeing someone else. I couldn't cling to the past anymore. The future was something I had to figure out on my own now. The next morning, I woke up feeling more exhausted than when I'd arrived. I hadn't slept well. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me, even in my dreams. But being at the cabin, away from everything, gave me some clarity. It was the first time in days I wasn't surrounded by reminders of her. I made coffee and sat outside, staring at the stillness of the lake, trying to plan my next move. There was no avoiding it. Divorce was inevitable. But even the thought of that process made me want to crawl back into bed and disappear. I knew I needed to go back eventually, face Melissa one last time, start the process of untangling our lives. But not yet. Not today. Today, I needed to figure out who I was without her. Because for so long, my identity had been tied to my marriage, to us. And now that us was gone, the lake was eerily still, as if even nature had paused to let me catch my breath. I sat there for hours, sipping my coffee, staring at the reflections on the water. There was something therapeutic about the silence, but it couldn't wash away the mess my life had become. I knew I couldn't stay in this cabin forever, hiding from the inevitable. The truth was, I had to go back. I had to confront the past, our home, our marriage, and most of all, Melissa. No amount of solitude could change that. By late afternoon, I forced myself to pack up. I left the cabin exactly as I found it, locking up and tossing the keys into the glove compartment. My head was a little clearer now, but my heart still felt heavy. There were no more decisions to make, just actions to take. This wasn't about salvaging anything. It was about closure. As I drove back toward the city, the roads gradually became more familiar, but they didn't bring the same sense of comfort they once had. It was strange how in just a few days, the places that had once been home now felt foreign, tainted by betrayal. The suburban streets were as mundane as ever, but now they felt like the backdrop to a life I no longer recognized. When I pulled into the driveway, I hesitated for a moment, staring at the house. It was just a building now, a shell of what had once been a home, but it was still filled with her things, with reminders of a life that had been meticulously crafted and then shattered. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. Inside, it was too quiet. Melissa wasn't there, thank God for that. I wasn't ready to face her yet. Not after the phone calls, the begging. I needed to be alone, to prepare for whatever was coming next. I went straight to the bedroom, pulling out a suitcase from the closet. I wasn't sure how long it would take to finalize the divorce, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay here. This house was a graveyard for the life we had built, and I couldn't spend another night under the same roof as the ghosts of our marriage. As I packed my things, I caught sight of a photo on the dresser. It was of us on our honeymoon, standing on a beach, smiling like we had the rest of our lives ahead of us. We looked so happy, so oblivious to the pain that was waiting for us down the line. I stared at the photo for a moment before shoving it into a drawer. It was too painful to look at. I focused on packing only the essentials: clothes, toiletries, a few personal items. I didn't need much, just enough to get by until I figured out what came next. The house would be dealt with later. It didn't feel like mine anymore anyway. Just as I zipped up the suitcase, I heard the front door open. My heart sank. Melissa was home. Her footsteps were soft, hesitant, as if she wasn't sure what she'd find. I stayed still, my back to the door, waiting for her to come to me. I heard her stop in the hallway, the tension in the air thick enough to choke on. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice small, fragile. I didn't turn around. "I'm leaving," I said simply. She didn't respond right away, and I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. "You can't just leave like this," she said after a long pause, her voice breaking. "We need to talk." "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied, still not facing her. "I told you, I'm done." I heard her step closer, her voice desperate now. "Please, just give me a chance. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But we can fix this. We can." I turned to face her, cutting her off with a look. "No, Melissa. We can't fix this. It's broken. You broke it." Her face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. She looked so different now, standing there in front of me, begging for something I couldn't give her. The confident, composed woman I had known was gone, replaced by someone who was grasping at straws. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I love you. I never stopped loving you." I shook my head, feeling the familiar pang of anger rise in my chest. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to throw that word around after everything you did. Love doesn't look like this, Melissa." Her tears started to fall, and she reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back, keeping the distance between us. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me with her tears. Not again. "I don't know who you are anymore," I said quietly. "I don't even know who I was in this marriage. But I know one thing. I'm not staying in this lie any longer." Her face twisted in anguish, but there was nothing left to say. I grabbed my suitcase and walked past her, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders as I crossed the threshold. It was over. Whatever we had was dead, and there was no bringing it back. I drove away from the house without looking back. There was no need to. My focus was on the road ahead, on the future that I had to build from the ground up. It wouldn't be easy. Divorce never was. But it was the only way forward. I pulled into a hotel parking lot a few miles away and checked in for the night. The room was small, basic, just a bed, a TV, and a window with a view of nothing. But it was mine. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. There were messages from Melissa, unread, and I knew there would be more in the coming days. Pleas, apologies, maybe even accusations. But I was done listening to her. I scrolled through my contacts and found the number for a divorce lawyer I had saved from a recommendation online. It was time to make the call, to set the wheels in motion. As the phone rang, I realized something. This was the beginning of my new life. A life without her, without lies. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew I was making the right choice. No, this isn't the end of the story. There's still more to be resolved as the protagonist fully steps into his new life and finalizes his emotional journey. The divorce process has only just begun, and there are likely more emotions to unpack, as well as potential consequences of his decisions, both legal and personal. The story's conclusion would naturally include reflecting on the aftermath of the divorce, how the protagonist rebuilds his life, and perhaps what he learns from the whole experience. If you'd like, I can continue with those next steps, weaving in closure and further development of the plot. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. The divorce lawyer's office was as sterile and cold as I imagined it would be. A place where broken lives came to be untangled, where love was reduced to signatures and settlements. I sat across from the lawyer, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and sharp eyes, explaining my situation in a voice that felt detached, like I was talking about someone else's life. He nodded, scribbling notes, occasionally asking questions about finances, property, and assets. It felt mechanical, transactional, a process designed to dissect a marriage like a surgeon extracting a tumor. "The good news," he said, setting down his pen, is that since there's no evidence of children involved and the assets are relatively straightforward, this should be a clean divorce. You're entitled to half of everything. We'll file the papers, and once she's served, the process will start. I nodded, grateful for the simplicity of it, though the word clean felt wrong. Nothing about this was clean. There were emotional wounds that no settlement could heal, scars that I would carry long after the paperwork was signed. The lawyer glanced at me, as if sensing my hesitation. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his tone softening. "Once we file, it's official? There's no going back?" His question caught me off guard. For a moment, I considered what he was asking. Was I sure? Could we really fix this? Was there any part of me that still wanted to try? But then I thought of the notebook, the lies, the way she had looked at me with those crocodile tears, trying to manipulate me with words that once held meaning but now felt hollow. "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady. I had to be. The days that followed felt like a blur. Melissa tried contacting me multiple times. Calls, texts, even an email. She was relentless, each message more desperate than the last. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, far enough away from the life we had shared, but close enough to feel the ghost of it. I'd catch myself thinking about the little things, the way we'd have coffee together in the mornings, her laugh when something silly happened on TV, the way she'd fall asleep next to me, her head resting on my shoulder. But then the bitterness would creep in, reminding me that those moments had been tainted. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had ruined every good memory we had by lying her way through it all. The apartment was my new refuge, though it felt empty, like it wasn't quite home yet. Boxes still sat unpacked in the corner, as if part of me wasn't ready to settle in, to accept that this was my life now. I spent most nights staring at the ceiling, thinking about what could have been, what should have been. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office, avoiding any downtime that would give my mind the space to wander back to her. But even work couldn't distract me from the looming sense of loss, the raw anger that still simmered just beneath the surface. The divorce process moved forward. Melissa was served the papers, and I knew she'd seen them because she called me right after. I didn't pick up, of course, but the voicemail she left played over and over in my head. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I still love you, please. I don't want it to end this way." But it had to end this way. There was no other way forward. Love doesn't survive on betrayal. It crumbles under the weight of it. A month passed. Then two. The legal process dragged on, but there was no drama. Melissa didn't fight the divorce. How could she? She had no ground to stand on. The house would be sold, the proceeds split. Our lives were being disentangled piece by piece, each step pulling me further away from her and the life we once had. Eventually, the final paperwork arrived. I remember the moment I signed it, the sense of finality as my pen scratched across the page. It felt surreal, like I was signing away not just my marriage but a version of myself that no longer existed. The papers were filed, and just like that, we were officially divorced. The strange thing was, I thought I would feel different afterward. Lighter, maybe. Free. But instead, there was just a quiet emptiness. The kind of stillness that comes after a long storm has passed. The wreckage was there, scattered around me, but the chaos was gone. I took time to think about what I had learned from all of this. About trust, about love, about how fragile both could be. In the end, I realized that the real betrayal wasn't just Melissa's cheating. It was the way I had betrayed myself by ignoring the signs, by convincing myself that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I learned that love wasn't enough to save a marriage. It took honesty, trust, and respect. All things Melissa had destroyed with her lies. And now, I had to rebuild those things for myself. Months later, I found myself back at the cabin by the lake. It had become my place of reflection, a sanctuary where I could sit with my thoughts and feel the weight of the past begin to lift. The pain was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer consumed me. I had begun to heal, slowly but surely. I had accepted that what happened wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have changed the outcome no matter how hard I tried. I wasn't ready to jump back into the dating world, to trust someone again. But that was okay. I was in no rush. For now, it was enough to know that I had survived, that I was stronger than I thought. As I sat by the water, watching the sun set over the lake, I felt a sense of peace for the first time in a long time. The chapter of my life with Melissa was over, but it wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new one where I got to choose what came next, and that, at least, felt like something worth holding on to.